In the golden halls of Caras Galadon, where the Malorn trees whispered ancient secrets to the wind, there dwelt an elf lord, whose name was spoken with reverence even among the wise. Erendur the Far-Seer, kinsman to Galadriel herself, possessed a gift that set him apart from all others of his kindred. He could perceive the threads of fate that bound all living things, and in his dreams he witnessed visions of what was, what is, and what yet might come to pass. Upon a night when Ithil hung full and bright above the golden wood, Erendur was visited by a dream more vivid than any that had come before. He beheld a figure small of stature yet great in purpose, bearing upon his finger a thing of such malice that the very air about him seemed to writhe with shadow. The halfling, for such he was, walked alone through desolate lands, his face marked by weariness beyond his years, yet in his eyes burned a light that no darkness could wholly quench. "Frodo," whispered a voice in the dream, though Erendur knew not from whence it came. "The bearer of burden, the ring-bearer who shall determine the fate of all Middle-earth." When dawn broke over Lothlorien, painting the leaves in hues of gold and silver, Erendur sought audience with the Lady Galadriel. In her mirror, they gazed together upon the vision, and her fair face grew grave as she perceived the truth of what her kinsman had witnessed. "Long have I known that one would come," she said, her voice like the song of crystal streams, "yet I had not foreseen that the burden would fall upon one so small, so far from the halls of power. This halfling you have seen, he walks now in the shadows of Emain Muil, though he knows it not, and his path shall lead him through perils that would daunt the mightiest of the Dunedain." "What am I to do with this vision, my lady?" asked Erendur, for in all his years, and they were many, even by the measure of the Eldar, never had a dream pressed upon him with such urgency. "You must follow where the sight leads you," replied Galadriel, "for I perceive that your fate is now bound to his, though neither of you yet understands the purpose. Go forth from the golden wood, and let your gift guide your steps. But beware, there are powers in Middle-earth that would see this bearer fail, and they have eyes that watch for any who would aid him." Thus began the quest of Erendur the Far-Seer, who left the safety of Lothlorien to seek one he had seen only in dreams, not knowing that his journey would lead him into the very heart of the shadow that threatened to engulf all the free peoples of Middle-earth. 7 days Erendur traveled from the borders of Lothlorien, his footsteps swift and sure, despite the rough country through which his path led him. By night he rested little, for the visions came to him with increasing clarity, showing him glimpses of the ring-bearer's perilous journey. He saw the halfling, Frodo, struggling through marshlands where the dead lay beneath still waters, their faces pale and accusing in the moonlight. He witnessed fierce debate between the bearer and his companion, a creature both pitiful and dangerous, whose twisted form spoke of corruption long endured. As Erendur drew near to the Emain Muil, those gray hills that marked the borders of Rohan, he encountered others who traveled the roads these dark times. A company of rangers from Ithilien passed him in the night, their faces grim with purpose, and from their captain he learned troubling news. "The lieutenant of the Tower of the Moon speaks truly," said the ranger captain, whose name was Mablung. "Great armies move in the east, and all the lands between the Anduin and the shadow of Mordor are filled with the enemy's servant. What business has an elf lord in these perilous borderlands?" Erendur chose his words with care, for he sensed that these were men of honor who served the steward of Gondor. Yet his mission was not one to be shared lightly. "I seek one who bears a great burden," he said at length, "one small in stature, but mighty in purpose, who even now walks through dangers that would daunt the hearts of warriors." At these words, Mablung's eyes grew keen with interest. "Small in stature, you say? We have heard whispers of such folk in these lands. Halflings they are called, though few of our people have seen them. The dead marshes have been troubled of late, and our watchers report strange movements near the borders of the Morannon. If your quarry ventures in that direction." "He does," said Erendur with certainty, for even as they spoke, The visions showed him the ring-bearer pressing ever eastward, drawn by a compulsion he could not resist. "Then may the Valar preserve him," muttered Mablung, "for no living thing that enters the Black Gate returns unchanged, if it returns at all." When morning came, Erendur pressed on alone, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The visions now came to him waking as well as sleeping, and he saw the ring-bearer's path with such clarity that he might have been walking beside him. Through the marshes of the dead they went, Frodo and his strange companion, while overhead the Nazgul circled on fell beasts, searching ever for the one who bore their master's ring. The mists rose thick from the stagnant waters as Erendur reached the borders of the dead marshes, and with them came whispers of voices long silent. Here, in ages past, had been fought the Battle of Dagorlad, where Gil-galad, the Elven King, and Isildur of Gondor had broken the power of Sauron, though at a cost that still echoed through the years. Now the faces of the fallen stared up through the dark water, neither living nor fully dead, trapped in the moment of their doom. In his visions, Erendur had seen the ring-bearer pass this way, led by his treacherous guide through paths known only to creatures that shunned the light. But when the Elf Lord came to the place where his sight showed him they had walked, he found signs of others who had been there before him, the wide prints of boots such as the Uruks wore, and the sharper tracks of wolves that served darker masks still. "They have been watched," he murmured to himself, kneeling to examine the marks in the soft earth. "The enemy's servants know of the bearer's passage, though perhaps not yet of his true identity." As if in answer to his words, a cry rang out across the marshes, wild and terrible, the voice of one of the nine who served the Lord of Mordor. High above, barely visible through the mist, a shape wheeled on broad wings, and Erendur felt the weight of its searching gaze as it passed over his hiding place among the reeds. For 3 days he followed the trail through that accursed place, seeing ever more sign that others hunted the same quarry. Orc bands from the Black Gate ranged far and wide, and twice he was forced to hide, while companies of Southrons passed, their Mumakil trumpeting challenges to the empty air. All sought the bearer of the ring, yet none knew precisely what they sought, save perhaps that their lord desired above all things to reclaim that which had been taken from him. On the third night, as Erendur kept vigil beside a pool where the faces of ancient warriors stared up with empty eyes, the visions came to him with renewed force. He saw the ring-bearer and his companions approach the very gates of Mordor, that dread portal known as the Morannon. But there was something else in the vision, a sense of watching eyes and hidden purpose that spoke of treachery beyond what even the wise might suspect. "Smeagol," he whispered, for in the dream sight he perceived the true nature of the creature that guided the halflings. "Gollum, as he is called in the common tongue. He serves neither light nor shadow, but only his own desire, and that desire will lead them all into peril beyond imagining." From his hiding place among the twisted rocks that bordered the Morannon, Erendur beheld one of the most dreadful sights that Middle-earth had witnessed since the Elder Days. The Black Gate of Mordor stood open, and from its iron portals poured forth an army such as had not been seen since the War of the Last Alliance. Trolls strode among the ranks like moving towers, their hide thick as stone and their eyes burning with malice. The mouth of Sauron rode at their head, his face hidden behind a steel mask that reflected no light, and his voice, when he spoke, was like the grinding of millstone. "Let the halfling hear me," cried the messenger of the Dark Tower. "I know that he passes this way, the thief who would steal from my master what belongs to him by right. Let him come forth, and his doom may yet be merciful." But no answer came from the rocks and shadows where Frodo and his companions lay hidden, for they had passed this way already, guided by paths known only to Smeagol in the days when he crept and crawled through the borders of the shadowy land. Erendur's visions showed him this truth, though the servants of the enemy knew it not. As the great host marched forth toward the west, intent upon the conquest of Minas Tirith and all the lands of Gondor, Erendur slipped through the shadows and entered Mordor itself. Long had it been since one of the elder kindred had set foot in that accursed realm, and the very air seemed to burn his lungs with its poison. The sky above was clouded with ash and smoke, and in the distance the fires of Mount Doom painted the horizon red as blood. Here his visions served him well, for they showed him paths that avoided the watchtowers and the roving bands of orcs that guarded the borders. Through valleys filled with slag and poisoned stream he made his way, following always the trace of the ring-bearer's passage. For one who bore such a burden could not pass unmarked through the realm of its making, and to eyes that could see beyond the veil of the present, his path was clear as letters written in fire. Yet as Erendur pressed deeper into Mordor, he began to perceive that his vision were changing. What had once shown him clear sight of past and present now flickered with images that seemed to shift and alter even as he watched. Sometimes he saw Frodo climbing the slopes of Mount Doom with his faithful Sam beside him. Other times, the mountain stood empty, wreathed only in smoke and flame. "The future grows uncertain," he murmured as he rested in the shadow of a great rock, shaped by the malice of Mordor into the likeness of a grasping hand. Some great choice approaches, upon which the fate of all may turn. But what choice, and who must make it? In the pits of Isengard, where once Saruman the White had held dominion, there stood still a tower that pierced the sky like a black needle. Though the wizard's power was broken and his servants scattered, one thing remained hidden in the depths of Orthanc: a palantir, a seeing stone of the Númenórean, whose gaze could pierce the veils of distance and time. Long had this stone been silent, its voice stilled by the fall of its master. Yet on the night when Erendur entered the borders of Mordor, it blazed suddenly with inner fire. In the great fortress of Barad-dûr, where the Dark Lord held court among shadows and flame, the answering stone stirred to wakefulness, and through their connection flowed whispers of power and malice. "The Elf Lord sees too much," spoke a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates, though no living throat gave it form. "His sight pierces the paths I would keep hidden, and his presence in my realm may turn the tide at the crucial moment. He must be diverted." From the Palantir of Isengard came an answer, though its source was not the fallen Saruman. "It shall be as you command, Master. The Farseer shall be led astray by visions false as fairest dream, and when the moment comes for choice, he shall not be there to guide the bearer's hand." Thus began a deception more subtle than any trap of steel or stone. As Erendur made his way through the wastes of Mordor, his visions began to show him scenes that seemed real as life itself, yet were cunningly wrought illusions designed to lead him far from his true purpose. He saw Frodo captured by orcs and dragged before the throne of the Dark Lord. He witnessed Sam fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, while his master lay helpless at his feet. Racing to aid them, the Elf Lord ran through valleys that led ever further from Mount Doom, while the true ring-bearer and his companion climbed slowly up the slopes of the Mountain of Fire, unaware that one who might have helped them in their darkest hour had been led astray by the very gift that should have been their salvation. For 7 days and nights, Erendur chased phantoms through the heart of Mordor, growing ever more desperate as his visions showed him the ring-bearer's doom drawing near. He fought orcs that existed only in his mind, climbed towers that were but shadows cast by the malice of the enemy, and all the while precious time slipped away like water through his fingers. While Erendur wandered lost in false visions, Frodo and Sam at last reached the Samath Naur, the chamber of fire that lay within the heart of Mount Doom. Here, where the One Ring had been forged in the fires of creation, it might yet be unmade, if the bearer could find within himself the will to cast away the thing that had become more precious to him than life itself. Yet in that moment of ultimate trial, when all the hopes of Middle-earth hung upon the choice of one small halfling, the power of the ring proved greater than even the strongest will. Standing upon the precipice above the fires of creation, Frodo claimed the ring for his own, and the very foundations of the world trembled at his word. In that instant, the false visions that had clouded Erendur's sight were burned away like mist before the sun. he saw with perfect clarity the scene that unfolded in the Chamber of Fire. Frodo standing transfigured by the ring's power, his form seeming to grow in majesty, even as his doom rushed upon him. Gollum attacking with the desperate fury of one who saw his precious slipping forever from his grasp. And then, in a moment that would echo through all the ages to come, the creature's triumph and doom combined as he seized the ring and fell with it into the fires below. "It is accomplished," whispered Erendur, falling to his knees among the rocks of Mordor as the very air around him began to shimmer and change. "The ring is destroyed, and the Dark Lord's power is broken at last." Above them all, the sky of Mordor split like a great wound, and through the rent came pouring light such as that realm had not seen since the world was young. The towers of Barad-dûr swayed like reeds in a hurricane, and from their topmost pinnacle came a cry of loss and rage that shattered mountains and boiled the waters of the Sea of Rhûn. But even as Erendur rejoiced in the victory of the light, his far sight showed him a truth that chilled his heart. In the wreck of the Samath Naur, Frodo lay unconscious beside his faithful Sam, both overcome by the heat and smoke of the mountain's fury. The chamber was collapsing around them, and unless aid came swiftly, the ring-bearer who had saved all Middle-earth would perish in the very moment of his triumph. "I must reach them," said the Elf Lord, rising to his feet, despite the exhaustion that weighed upon his limbs. "The sight was given to me for this purpose, not merely to witness their victory, but to ensure that they live to see the dawn of the new age." Through the tumult and chaos of Mordor's death throes, Erendur ran as he had never run before, his feet barely touching the ground as he leaped from stone to stone up the crumbling slopes of Mount Doom. Behind him, the realm of the enemy collapsed in upon itself, fortresses toppling, armies scattering like leaves before a storm, and the very earth opening in great chasms that swallowed the works of malice whole. Yet even as he climbed, the Farseer's visions showed him that he would not reach the Chamber of Fire in time. The mountain's fury was too great, the path too treacherous, and though his elven kind were swift of foot and strong of limb, he was not mighty enough to breach the walls of flame that now surrounded the Samath Naur. Then, through the smoke and ash that filled the air, came a sound that lifted his heart, like trumpet song at dawn, the cry of the great eagles, led by Gwaihir, the Wind Lord himself. Down they swept from the heights of the sky, their wings cutting through the poisonous air as easily as knives through silk. And Erendur beheld their purpose with joy beyond measure. "They go to save the ring-bearer," he said aloud, though no ear was near to hear him. "The eagles of Manwë come at the hour of greatest need, as was foretold in the songs of old." Yet, as he watched their flight, another vision came to him, one that filled him with sudden dread. Among the great birds flew one whose form was smaller and whose purpose was darker. Landroval, brother to Gwaihir, bore upon his back a figure clad in grey robe, whose face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Gandalf," whispered Erendur, and in his far sight he perceived the wizard's true intent. For Gandalf, Mithrandir, was more than he appeared. He was Olorin, the Maya, servant of Manwë himself, and his mission in Middle-earth was not yet complete. The ring was destroyed, yes, but its destruction had torn holes in the very fabric of creation, holes through which powers from beyond the world might enter and claim dominion over all that lived. In the wizard's eyes burned a light that was not entirely his own, and Erendur saw with growing horror that the one who had guided the fellowship and counseled the free people was no longer wholly himself. Something had entered him during his battle with the Balrog in the depths of Khazad-dûm, something ancient and powerful and utterly alien to Middle-earth. The true enemy, breathed the Elf Lord, understanding at last why his visions had been so unclear, why the future itself seemed to shift and change even as he watched. Sauron was but the servant, and his ring but the key. The real danger lies not in conquest, but in transformation, the changing of Middle-earth itself into something that was never meant to be. Far to the west, in the hidden valley of Imladrid, Elrond, half-elven, stood upon the steps of his house and gazed eastward with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of ages. Beside him stood Glorfindel of Gondolin, and both their faces were grave with knowledge that few among the wise possessed. "It is done," said Elrond softly, as the news of the ring's destruction reached him through ways that mortal folk could not understand. "Sauron is fallen, and his dominion is ended. Yet I fear that our trials are not yet over. For there are powers in the world that make the Dark Lord seem as a child playing with toys." "You speak of the nameless things," replied Glorfindel, his golden hair stirring in the evening breeze, "the entities that gnaw at the roots of creation itself, seeking always to devour what Eru Ilúvatar has made and reshape it according to their own design. Even so, when Gandalf fell in Moria and returned as Gandalf the White, we rejoiced that our friend had been restored to us. But I have long suspected that what returned was not wholly what fell, that in the depths beyond the world, where flame cannot live and shadow cannot die, he encountered something that should never have been wakened." In his memory, Elrond recalled the last meeting of the White Council, when Gandalf had proposed a plan so audacious that even Saruman had been taken aback. The wizard had spoken of ways to ensure that the ring's destruction would open no doors for worse things to enter Middle-earth. Yet now, in the hour of victory, Elrond perceived that the plan had been flawed from the beginning. "Erendur saw truly when he left Lothlorien," the Elf Lord continued. "His gift of farsight was needed not to ensure the ring's destruction, but to prevent what comes after. Even now, he races through the ruins of Mordor, seeking to undo what we in our wisdom have set in motion." "Then we must aid him," said Glorfindel, his hand moving instinctively to the hilt of his sword. "If the nameless things gain foothold in our world through the wizard's corruption, then all our victories will turn to ash." But Elrond shook his head sadly. "It is too late for us to intervene directly. The moment of choice is upon us, and it falls to one whom we had not foreseen. The Farseer himself must become the thing he has long observed. He must cease to be merely one who watches the threads of fate, and instead take hold of them, weaving a new pattern that will preserve Middle-earth from the corruption that threatens to consume it." As he spoke these words, both elves felt the change beginning, a subtle alteration in the very air they breathed, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Upon the slopes of Mount Doom, as the great eagles bore Frodo and Sam to safety, Gandalf the White stood in the ruins of the Sammath Naur and gazed into the fires that had unmade the Ring of Power. To mortal eyes, he appeared unchanged, still the wizard who had guided the Fellowship and counseled the kings of men. But to one gifted with farsight, as Erendur was, the truth was plain to see. Where once had dwelt the spirit of Olorin the Maya, compassionate and wise, now resided something else entirely. It wore the wizard's form like a cloak and spoke with his voice, but its essence was older than the music of creation itself, one of the nameless things that had existed in the void before Eru Ilúvatar spoke the world into being. "The ring is destroyed," spoke Gandalf to the empty air, though his words carried to ears both seen and unseen. "The first phase is complete. Now begins the true work, the remaking of Middle-earth in forms more pleasing to our design." From the ashes and slag of Mount Doom's heart, shapes began to rise, not orcs or trolls or any creature that belonged to Sauron's dominion, but things that had no names in any tongue of Middle-earth. They moved like liquid shadow given form, and where they passed, the very stones began to change, taking on geometries that hurt the eye to look upon. Erendur, watching from his hiding place among the rocks, felt his heart fill with despair. The visions that had guided him here showed him now what was to come. A world transformed beyond recognition, where the forests of Fangorn would become crystalline gardens of impossible beauty, where the rivers would run with liquid light instead of water, and where the free peoples themselves would be changed into forms that better suited their new master's aesthetic. It would not be evil, as mortals understand it, the elf lord whispered to himself. It would be beautiful beyond description, perfect in every detail, and utterly alien to everything that makes Middle-earth what it is. The children of Iluvatar would become living artworks, their souls preserved like flowers pressed between the pages of a book. Yet even as horror threatened to overwhelm him, Erendur's far sight showed him one last vision, a glimpse of possibility that hung by the thinnest of threads. There was a choice yet to be made, a moment when the pattern might be altered, but it would require a sacrifice greater than any that had been asked of the ring-bearer, for it would mean the giving up of the very gift that made him who he was. Standing among the ruins of the Mountain of Fire, while the nameless thing that wore Gandalf's form began its work of transformation, Erendur the Far-Seer prepared to make the hardest choice of his long life. "You have seen much, Erendur of Lothlorien," came a voice from behind him, and the elf lord turned to see Gandalf approaching through the smoke and ash. Yet this was not the wizard as he had appeared to the Fellowship, radiant with power restored. This was something wearing his face like a mask, and behind his gray eyes moved shapes that belonged to no realm of light. "I have indeed," replied Erendur, his hand moving to the long knife at his side. Not that any blade of elven make could harm one of the nameless things, but the weight of it gave him comfort. "I have seen the end toward which you strive, and I have seen also the path by which it might be prevented." The thing that wore Gandalf's form smiled, and its smile was beautiful and terrible to behold. "Prevent? But why would you wish to prevent the perfection of all things? I offer beauty beyond imagining, harmony that will endure until the end of time, an existence free from suffering and death, and all the petty struggles that plague the children of Iluvatar. Is this not what all wise beings desire?" "It is not what they are," said Erendur simply. "You would preserve their forms while destroying their essence, keeping their bodies while taking away everything that makes them who they are. This is not love, but possession of the most profound kind. And what would you do to stop me? You are but one elf, far from your kindred, bearing no weapon that can harm me, and wielding no power save the sight that allows you to perceive what is and what might be. That sight is enough," replied Erendur, and as he spoke, he began to understand what the final vision had shown him. His farsight was more than a gift. It was a thread that bound him to the music of creation itself, a harmony that resonated with the fundamental nature of Middle-earth, as Eru Iluvatar had made it. Closing his eyes, the elf lord reached out with his consciousness, feeling for the places where the corruption had already begun to take hold. There, in the stones beneath his feet, now beginning to shift into impossible configurations. There, in the air itself, where the nameless thing's presence was altering the very nature of reality. And there, in the false wizard's borrowed form, where something ancient and alien sought to establish its foothold in the world. "I offer my sight freely," Erendur spoke aloud, though his words were not directed at the creature before him. "Let it burn away the corruption, even if it burns away myself as well. Let Middle-earth remain as it was meant to be, shaped by the hands of its maker, and no other." The power that flowed through him then was like fire and music combined, and he felt his very essence being drawn out of him and spread across the wounded fabric of reality. Where his sacrifice touched the corruption, it dissolved like salt in water, returning stone to stone and air to air. The nameless thing screamed, a sound that shattered mountains and turned rivers backward in their courses, and its borrowed form began to waver, like a mirage in the desert heat. Across all Middle-earth, the change was felt as the Far-Seer's sacrifice took effect. In Minas Tirith, where Aragorn stood crowned as King Elisar, the very stones of the White City began to sing with renewed life. In the Shire, where the hobbits were already beginning to rebuild what the ruffians had destroyed, flowers bloomed out of season, and the green hills seemed to glow with inner light. In Lothlorien, the Lady Galadriel felt the passing of her kinsman like a physical blow. yet she smiled through her tears as she perceived what he had accomplished. "Greater love hath no one than this," she whispered, in the ancient tongue of the Eldar, "that he lay down his life for his friends, even for friends he has never met, in times he will never see." Upon Mount Doom, the Nameless Thing fought desperately to maintain its hold upon the world, but the Elf Lord's gift was too strong, too pure in its purpose. Fed by the music of creation itself, Erendur's far sight burned through every tendril of corruption, every alteration that sought to change Middle-earth from what it was meant to be. "You cannot destroy what has always been," gasped the creature, its stolen form beginning to fade. "No," replied Erendur, though his voice now came from everywhere and nowhere, dispersed as his essence was throughout the healing world, "but I can restore what was corrupted, and ensure that it remains as Eru Iluvatar intended. Your kind belongs in the void beyond the world, not in the realm of the children. Return there and trouble the music no more." With a final shriek of rage and loss, the Nameless Thing was cast out, and the form of Gandalf collapsed upon the rocky ground. But this was no longer the alien presence that had worn the wizard's shape. This was Olorin himself, restored to his rightful place by the Far-Seer's sacrifice, though much diminished by his ordeal. "Erendur," the wizard whispered, struggling to his feet. "I remember now, in the depths beneath Khazad-dûm, when the flame of Anor failed me, something else offered its aid. I thought it was Eru himself, calling me back to service. But it was. Peace, Mithrandir," came the Far-Seer's voice on the wind. "You were deceived, as we all were deceived. The important thing is that the deception is ended, and Middle-earth remains itself. My part in this tale is finished, but yours continued. There are those who will need your counsel in the days to come, and now you can give it with a clear heart." As he spoke these words, Erendur felt his consciousness beginning to fade, his life force spent in the great work of restoration. Yet he was not afraid, for his far sight showed him one last vision, Middle-earth as it would be in the ages to come, free to grow and change according to its own nature, unmarred by alien influence. In that vision, he saw Frodo and Sam returning to the Shire as heroes, though they would bear the scars of their adventure all their days. He saw Aragorn ruling wisely from Minas Tirith, with Arwen Evenstar at his side. He saw the Ents walking once more in Fangorn, and the dwarves rebuilding the glory of Khazad-dûm. All of this and more would come to pass, because one elf lord had been willing to give up everything he was to preserve everything he loved. Years passed, and the tale of Erendur the Far-Seer became legend, sung by minstrels in the halls of kings and whispered by mothers to their children as they lay sleeping. Few knew the full truth of what had transpired on Mount Doom after the ring's destruction, but all felt the blessing of his sacrifice in the peace that followed. Gandalf the Grey, for so he appeared once more, his white robes burned away by the ordeal, sometimes spoke of his friend to those who had ears to hear. He was the greatest of seers, the wizard would say, not because he could perceive the future, but because he could see what needed to be preserved from the past. In the end, that may be the most important sight of all. In Lothlorien, where the Malorn trees grew ever taller and more beautiful, Galadriel caused to be planted a garden in memory of her kinsman. There grew flowers that bloomed in all seasons, their petals reflecting the light of stars that had shone in the elder days, and visitors would often report that they heard music on the wind, not the voice of the Far-Seer himself, for he had passed beyond the circles of the world, but the echo of his sacrifice, woven now into the very fabric of Middle-earth. The hobbits, when they learned of the Elf Lord, who had given his life to preserve their peaceful lands, were moved to establish a new tradition. Each year on the anniversary of the ring's destruction, they would gather in the party field and tell stories of far-off places and brave deeds, always ending with a toast to the one who saw us in his dream. They never quite understood what it meant, but the words felt right, and that was enough for folk of the Shire. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the stars shone bright above Middle-earth, those with eyes to see might catch a glimpse of a figure walking the roads, an elf lord tall and fair, his presence bringing peace to troubled hearts and hope to those who had lost their way. But this was not Erendur himself, for he had passed beyond all earthly form. Rather, it was the memory of his sacrifice made manifest, a blessing that would endure as long as grass grew and water ran in Middle-earth. For in giving up his gift of far sight to save the world from corruption, Erendur had become something greater than what he was. Not a seer of what might be, but a guardian of what should always remain. The free choice of the children of Ilúvatar to shape their own destinies, the right of every living thing to grow according to its nature, and the eternal music that sang in the heart of creation itself. Thus ends the tale of he who saw Frodo in a dream, the far-seer who looked beyond the veil of time and found that the greatest vision of all was the simple truth that some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. His name was written in no chronicle of kings, carved upon no monument of stone, yet his deed echoed through all the ages that followed, a note of pure harmony in the ongoing song of Middle-earth. And if sometimes travelers on the road would swear they heard a voice on the wind, speaking words of comfort and guidance, they were not mistaken. For the gift Erendur had sacrificed was not truly lost. It had become part of the world itself, ensuring that in the darkest hours, when all hope seemed fled, someone would always be watching over the innocent and the brave, seeing them clearly in the light of love that knows no ending. In the halls of Mando, where the spirits of the departed dwell until the end of all things, Erendur the Far-Seer rests in peace, knowing that his vision of Middle-earth, free, beautiful, and forever growing toward its own perfect fulfillment, will endure until the final music fades and the last star goes dark. And perhaps, when that final day comes and all tales are told, his will be remembered as the greatest sight of all. The choice to preserve rather than perfect, to protect rather than possess, and to love the world enough to let it be itself.